Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Today what we're going to be looking at is a theme. And rather than discuss some of these authors in an isolated video, I figured this would go better. Some of the authors that we're going to talk about, I've mentioned on this channel before. Virginnie Despentes, I had intended to just reread all of her work and make a video specifically for her. At some point that may happen, but after the third book of hers, reading it, I felt like I needed to step away for a little while, and I don't know if I'll ever get around to talking about her. The theme that we're looking at is prostitution. And there are authors who I've read in English and in French whose work either concerned prostitution and sex work or was written by people who had worked in sex work. We're going to be looking at people who speak French or spoke French and Anglophones, English speakers. As I said, the work is primarily from the US and France. Nelly Arcan, who we'll talk about, was Quebecois. So, I hope that sounds interesting to you, but if not, I do understand if this theme goes either against the grain for certain people or it's just not interesting. But if you're still around, I'm Mark, and this is Several Books. The first author that we're going to talk about is Jean Genet. I'll go through this in a roughly chronological order. Jean Genet was essentially saved from more than a decade in prison by intellectuals in Paris. His work today is known mostly because it's queer work. Most of what he's talking about is a life of being a gay prostitute. So he was in sex work. He was a thief. His work talks about murder. And so before I had read Jean Genet, what I was mostly thinking of and the image that I had of him was somebody who wrote a lot about gay sex and so on and so forth. Transgressive, I had heard, so I'm expecting maybe a William Burroughs type character. Then I read Jean Genet. I read Our Lady of the Flowers in English, and I found it okay. It's very much like a prose poem. There wasn't a lot of sex in the book, and then I eventually realized that the idea that Genet actually wrote much about sex at all was kind of misconstrued. But Our Lady of the Flowers was an entertaining book. I had read a lot of French literature in translation, and to me it seemed more worthwhile to read something like Gide. I then read Notre Dame de Fleurs en français, and there is something about Genet's voice that isn't really easy to translate. And so there are a few authors we're looking at in French, and that's the case with most of them. But Genet in specific, Our Lady of the Flowers kind of reads like a life of the saints, except the saints are street criminals. There's murderers. They are drag queens. They're trans. Notably in Notre Dame de Fleurs, Genet uses the feminine pronoun elle for divine. And that's unusual, especially in the 1940s, I believe it was written in. I read more of Genet, and a lot of what he talks about is a life of prostitution and sex work. His theater definitely goes off, as well as his memoir. They're not really necessarily about that much at all. But there are some pretty funny things and interesting things in Genet. In Pommes Funèbres, there is there's a sex scene with Hitler, a gay sex scene. Genet's work is primarily autofiction. The level to which he's a self-insert does change between the works, but especially Miracle de Rose and Journal de Voleur, Genet is very clearly being himself in that. I don't remember if he changes his name even. I don't think he does, but I'm not positive. Carrel de Debray was okay. It's probably my least favorite of his works. I don't see it mentioned online when I'm looking at lit forums, so I assume that's kind of a universal opinion. To say more about Our Lady of the Flowers or Notre Dame de Fleurs, as I said, it's written in kind of a Life of Saints thing, in that he really talks about his critique of morality. He is exonerating this murderer as a saint in the book, and that is something that follows Genet throughout. So when I had first met somebody who actually read Genet, when for me he was just a name to drop, the guy seemed to understand that I hadn't really had the familiarity with him that I thought I did or pretended to have. And he's like, no, it's mostly just about killing people. And if you do read Genet as he's published today, you're not getting a lot of gay sex. It's in all of the work, but a lot of the things that were more graphic were apparently removed at the editing table, so to speak, when they were taken out of the prison. I think the work is probably better without it. There are so many writers who primarily write sex novels that you're not really missing much. Genet was definitely talented with words. He's somebody. It's definitely a surprise that we have his writing. It occurs to me as I'm speaking that I didn't really give a biography of Genet, aside from just saying that he was a street prostitute and had been in prison multiple times. I believe his mother was also a prostitute, and Genet was in trouble from the time he was young. So those are just things to keep in mind. He was kind of born into that life. What I'm going to do, since I'm just talking about the role of prostitution in these books, is I will say now that for my book, Genet is probably an S-tier writer in French. In Notre Dame de Fleurs in English, some of that idea of the lives of the saints and this kind of Catholic, very religious, traditional idea applied to a very unconventional figure was maybe not easy to carry over to English. But in general, you're getting such a wealth in character. Genet really doesn't stress the overarching plot at all in his writing. Most of his writing really is focused on character. And most of the, as I said, the sex is kind of an afterthought when it appears. There is some drug use, like in Carrel de Debray, but it's not really worth mentioning. It's so minor. The dealing is more important in that book, but it's not really the center of the novel. What I would say about Genet is the transgression is mostly focused on the act of murder and violence. His plays become very aware of social justice issues toward the end of his career. And so he writes a lot of stuff about the Middle East and Africa. And the same is said for his memoir. His memoir is definitely worth looking at. It's beautifully written. The subject is a little less transgressive, but he's still very much in the mindset that he carried when he was younger writing his other books. To rate Genet, what I'm going to do is basically say that, like I said, he's an S-tier author. There's not a whole lot else to say. If you're looking for a place to start, I would recommend Notre Dame de Fleurs or Our Lady of the Flowers. The book is great. Journal of a Thief or Thief's Journal is likewise pretty well known. Genet's late theater is experimental. So the way in which it's experimental is he's kind of a maximalist, and you wind up with plays that have 30 characters. There's not many of them. I think he only, well, I read 11 of them. In my collection, it was 11. But the last 2 or 3 plays are pretty unusual. The other plays tend to be pretty realistic. He's focused on his conflicts, his same themes: violence, homosexuality, transgression, etc. I'd say that's pretty much it. Genet, S-tier author, definitely worth your look, but I'm going to say everybody here is an S-tier author. The second author that I'm going to mention is another Francophone author, and that's Pierre Guyotat. And if you can see up here, this is most of my Guyotat collection. I've read 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. I've read 11 books by Pierre Guyotat. Eden is known online. When I first encountered Pierre Guyotat, I discovered him online. A lot of these authors I did not discover online, but or at least not through conventional, Google searching and so forth. But Guyotat I saw on BookTube, and I read Eden first. And that's the book that's become kind of, to some extent, a meme. If it's the only thing you've seen of an author, it's kind of over the top. There's sex on every page, as in most of his books, and it can be a bit overwhelming. Likewise, the book is written in what I guess you could call a song. I've seen people refer to this type of poem, but it's one sentence broken up through M dashes, semicolons, and so forth. There's very little dialogue. There is definitely dialogue, but there's not a lot of it. It's mostly descriptions of sexual activity in a brothel. There are a few scenes elsewhere, but it's pretty much all sexualized. The point for Guyotat is to display the horror of the Algerian War. Guyotat was basically drafted to go be in the Algerian War, and he created quite a stir for himself. He distributed anti-war pamphlets. He was locked in solitary for a period of time. For me, Guyotat is a sort of old man of letters. He's passed away now. I think he died 2 or 3 years ago. But I've read 11 books by him. So I've seen the books that weren't published right away, that he wrote when he was young. They're very much not like his more transgressive experimental work. There's not a lot of them, but there's some sex stuff. I think it's called Ashby, or Sur and Surval. But they're fairly conventional realist writing. When we get to Tombeau pour 500,000 soldats, 500,000 soldiers, the tomb for 500,000 soldiers, we're starting to get this more aggressive, in-your-face Guyotat. And Guyotat is, he writes with a very distinct voice. And for those first two in this style of writing about prostitutes, Tombu and Eden, 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 those are really, in my opinion, his best works. But the other stuff is definitely worth looking at to an extent. As I just said, Guyotat wrote kind of prose poems after a fashion. And his infatuation with his own voice really becomes evident in prostitution. Prostitution takes place, I believe it's in Algeria. It might be in a make-believe country, but it's essentially that area of the world. There's transliterated Arabic in it, and it's slang, and there's distortion of most of the characters' voices. Sex appears, I believe, on every page. It's essentially talked about on every page. And there's one or two acts that are specifically said where it's literally on every page. It's kind of like, oh wow, that's a thing. Prostitution is my least favorite Guyotat book. I had the most trouble with it. There's an English translation available. Most of his work is available through different means. I know that Tomb for 500,000 Soldiers is sometimes, or was published in a paperback form that now goes for a couple $100. At the same time, I had an online friend who I talked to about it, and he was able to find a used copy of the book for essentially what you would expect to find any paperback, large paperback, something like $15 or whatever. But yeah, I was talking about prostitution, and it's just, if you can find an English copy, knock yourself out, but it's not his best work. After that, we've got Le Livre, which essentially tracks prostitution throughout different periods of time, and also different countries. It's better. It's not as good as Eden, Eden, Eden or Tomb, but I don't think an English copy is available of that. There isn't really a central character in the book. Like I said, it's more of a prose poem. Think maybe something along the lines of the Cantos by Pound or something like that. But this is a prose poem. It's not actual scanned poetry. After Le Livre, we've got a nonfiction work called Coma. Guyotat wrote that about having written himself into a coma. He just essentially sat at a table writing. It's extremely poetic. It's available in English through Semiotext, and that's curated by what's her name? Chris Kraus. So, I mean, I would support that. It's a solid book. I read it very quickly, I will say. Formation was a memoir of his youth, and it's okay. It's very unlike other Guyotat, such as Coma is also unlike other Guyotat. I don't think that's available in English. Then we've got a large trilogy, and so Guyotat made of himself an epic novelist. That takes place in a fictitious country. Tonally, it is also a little different. There's some more humor than is typical in Guyotat. And then he wrote another memoir called Idiocy, and that's coming out in English. Guyotat. What would I say about Guyotat? For Guyotat, prostitution is kind of the lowest level in society. These are people who are abused, mistreated, attacked, and they also represent all of the violence that occurs in society. I would feel comfortable saying Guyotat is kind of like an extreme horror novelist, but I wouldn't necessarily go out of my way to make comparisons. That's a genre I don't know a huge amount about. But yeah, when you read Guyotat, it's very much to make you aware of the cruelties of society. So there's another novel called Progenitors that I own but I haven't read. The French is very argot heavy. It's got slang. There's weird spellings of words. So I imagine I'll have a lot of difficulty with the book. I've also got a book called Area Found, which is about Guyotat when he was 15. Guyotat's writing methods, I'm not going to say exactly what they were, but he had a very sexual practice that he incorporated into his early writing, I guess would be the way to describe it. And yeah, he's definitely a weird guy. They are books that probably bear some resemblance to one of my least favorite authors, who's the Marquis de Sade, which is funny. A lot of the authors I like at different times were interested in de Sade, but it's the tone that really makes Guyotat kind of what he is. It really is about style. And it's just something that you can't dismiss when you're reading him. Okay, so the question becomes kind of, where do we go from here? I could continue along the French line, or we could talk about some English speakers. So I think what we'll do is continue along kind of a very vague chronology, and I'll say that I think of the authors we were reading, the next one, William Volmann, is the author who, well, he's the one I read the most recently. I just finished up The Royal Family. Volmann has a trilogy called, or I've seen referred to as the Prostitution trilogy. It's Horse for Gloria, The Butterfly Stories, and The Royal Family. Horse for Gloria is a very tightly compacted novella, or short novel. It's about 100 pages. There's some actual reportage at the end of the book about his interviews. It was a very tightly controlled narrative. There's something holy in Volmann, the same way there's something holy in Jean Genet. For him, this Queen of the Whores figure is of central concern. So I guess you'd call that a madam. They're kind of imbued with magic. And although we don't really meet one in Horse for Gloria, we're in search of one. And in Butterfly Stories, we meet the madam, but we're not interested in her right away. And we don't realize the character, the narrator is forming this attachment to her. In The Royal Family, the Queen is of central concern. I read this trilogy in chronological order. I read Horse for Gloria and Butterfly Stories and then The Royal Family. The only thing that makes this a trilogy is that there's one sentence in The Royal Family that references characters from both Butterfly Stories and Horse for Gloria. There's a reference to the Queen of the Whores being named Vanna, who is the Queen in Butterfly Stories, or Gloria. And that's the only thing that ties these together as a firm trilogy. Thematically, it's interesting. I'm going to be reading Volmann, and I was seeing people. Somebody told me to read one in a little thing under the video. I had also been interested in him for a while, but I had never really read him. I knew of him as the figure in the kind of the Pomo canon, but lit bro audience. Butterfly Stories was not a very good book. It's his short stories. And what I'm saying is that I bought a copy of Rainbow Stories, and I'm a bit scared because I definitely can be a bit of a short story snob. Butterfly Stories is a story cycle. I've seen it called a episodic novel. There's not really a coherent, this is what you expect from a novel. There's a lot of time jumping between chapters. I don't think there is a definite through drive or goal throughout the entire book. When Vanna appears, she becomes more interesting to our narrator. Of the three, I would say the royal family was the best. Horse for Gloria is also a pretty solid short read, though. I wouldn't read that expecting your life to be changed, but I saw a blurb on the cover of my copy of the book that compares it to Last Exit to Brooklyn. You guys know I'm a big Hubert Selby Jr. fan, and I think that's an accurate comparison. So I'm now officially a fan of William Volmann. I've read 4 of his books. I'm going to be reading a few more. There's the theological element for Volmann to prostitution that I want to talk about or mention. And other than that, I would say that the books carry a kind of raunchiness that is very hard not to mention. Especially the royal family has some sex acts that are pretty... I mean, it's not the most shocking stuff I've ever read, but it's definitely not the nicest story. So that's William Volmann. I've read 4 of his books, and I'll say that he's probably like a S-tier author as well. All these guys are. The next author in this group that I want to talk about is Virginie Despentes. Now, Houellebecq's books might have started being published before hers, but they're both mostly kind of getting their grounding in the 90s. Likewise, Houellebecq only wrote 1 book that really discusses prostitution that we'll talk about, whereas Virginie Despentes, she was a sex worker. Virginie Despentes had been a prostitute. She'd been a stripper. She wrote reviews, I believe, of movies, if you understand me, for work for a while. Virginie Despentes is just great. For a while, she was my favorite writer. I don't know if I would still call her that. I don't think I would, but I have a very strong soft spot for her. She reminds me of a more intellectual, better Bukowski. She would like that comparison, I think. As for works that engage with prostitution, I don't know if she really has any definite aside from Baisemois. And that's a revenge novel where 2 whores go out on a killing spree. I did reread that in the past few months for this video, or a video on Despentes. I love that book. I think viewing it solely as transgressive literature does it a disservice. I think the book is stronger than that. After that, Le Chien Savant has what's it called? Sex work in the book. Le Jolie Chose, I think, comes after that, and that doesn't. Teen Spirit is a nice coming together father-daughter story, but it's also got, Nirvana. It's named after, so it's got that kind of attitude. We've got Bye Bye Blondie, which deals with homelessness as well. And I would say that's probably one of my favorite books by her, if not my favorite. It is a romance novel. It's a straight-up romance novel, but it's postmodernized, the same way we see with, like, sci-fi detective stories. This genre-bendy element. It's very much like a self-conscious, I'm writing a romance story, but I'm going to do it differently kind of thing. And what she does differently is that her characters are basically punks for most of the novel. They're teens and stuff, and they're punks. It's a great love story, though. I love the novel, and if you were ever into punk music, she name drops so many punk bands just all the time, and that's a good novel for that. King Kong Theory is a memoir that discusses some of her time working in the industry. She was assaulted at one point. She writes about that. Apocalypse Bebe comes next. I don't think that has prostitution in it necessarily, but there's some stuff that is very close to it. And then there's the Vernon Subutex trilogy. Vernon, the main character, becomes homeless in that book. So that's trilogy. It's a great trilogy. It was nominated for a Booker, I believe. Every once in a while I see mention of Virginie Despentes online, so I know she's not totally unknown in the Anglophone world. She's definitely translated. You can find all of her books through the feminist press, which I'm sure is shocking to some viewers. Nobody wants to read the feminists, so to speak. But when I say nobody, I mean no men. But I'm here vouching for her to the best of my ability. Virginie Despentes is worth reading. The Subutex trilogy is different. It's got an unusual ending. I'm not going to say any more than that. Cher Connard, or Dear Asshole, is about Me Too. So that's the only book I've read about Me Too. I don't know of many books being written about the subject, though. I'm not exactly tuned into it, but I have read that book. She's more sympathetic to the male end of the side than I think a lot of people would probably have liked her to be. But at the same time, that's definitely not the only element of the book. So as you can see, despite that sex work was a part of Virginie Despentes' life for a while, she didn't just make it her whole personality, so to speak. It definitely colors and bleeds into everything, but it's not just, this is prostitution ad infinitum. So yeah, Virginie Despentes is definitely an interesting writer, worth looking at. After that, we'll talk about Houellebecq. So my Despentes down here, my Houellebecq is up here. The only novel I'm going to talk about is Platform. There are other novels that he's written that deal with the subject of prostitution, but Platform is essentially about the subject. A man devises a tourist vacation planner for sex tourism, and this man is portrayed very sympathetically. He is the narrator of the book. I love the book. For a while, I would say probably either it or Possibility of an Isle are my two favorite Houellebecq. That's a very good book too, for possibly controversial reasons. But Platform is a solid book. I found the ending a bit rushed. The one thing I want to say about Houellebecq, and I'm not the arbiter of taste. I'm I'm not a woman. I'm a nearly 40-year-old man. I've read like Andrea Dworkin and stuff. I've read Judith Jack Halberstam. I've read Judith Butler. I feel that, and Paul B. Preciado seems to agree with me in Testo Junkie. But Houellebecq seems to be very much a writer of gender. It's just that he's writing about a typically male element of that. So I think Houellebecq's very interesting for that. When that comes into play with platform, we're getting that distance. We're getting a more nuanced, but at the same time very male-centered kind of take on the sexual dynamic of the world. I felt the ending was a little rushed, or maybe not as solid as it could have been. It created an outcry when it was published. The ending caused Houellebecq to leave France and go to Ireland. So I'm certainly not the only person who would say that about the book. In this specific conversation, writers about prostitution, this book makes sure that Houellebecq has a place in the conversation, but in his entire catalog, it's not really the focus. Houellebecq typically writes stuff that's a little more thriller-esque, and so it's there's not much more to really say on the subject. I think Houellebecq is good. He has a following online. You see him mentioned online a lot of places. I'm a big Houellebecq fan. I kind of learned to read French by reading Houellebecq. I got interested in the swear words and the sexual representation. I'm not totally sold on him though. Every book that he wrote is not genius, and it makes sense to me that there are a number of French people who don't want to be associated with him. I wouldn't want to be decided to be a Houellebecq adherent based on various political things that he said and actions that he's committed in public. But if we're talking about prostitution and the literature of it, I would encourage you to read Platform. I just think that probably you shouldn't hold exactly the same ideas that Houellebecq had himself. Now, I suppose that I should include, since we're kind of working our way into the 90s and the very more contemporary stuff, that I should make a mention of Kathy Acker. I do have a video of Kathy Acker. In reality, I would just encourage you to watch that video. But I need to mention her here. She herself worked as a stripper. There are characters in her books that were strippers. There is sex work present in the work. It's really kind of something that needs to be addressed as well. So if you're interested in Kathy Acker, I made a video. It was my first video to make on the channel. It's a little rushed. It's probably not my best video, but Kathy Acker is and remains to be one of my favorite writers. So please, by all means, check out Kathy Acker. Another writer I want to talk about is Mary Gaitskil. And Mary Gaitskil is an American writer. She worked as a stripper for a period of time. I have only read 3 of Mary Gaitskil's books. 1 novel and 2 short story collections. I felt that Bad Behaviors would be the most relevant to this specific video. There is, I believe, mention of prostitution in some of those short stories. I don't remember it being as prominent a thing in Because They Wanted To, but I could be wrong about that. I prefer Bad Behavior to Because They Wanted To. I think although the stories are maybe a little lighter and it's clearer that she's earlier in her career, in general I like the attitude of the book a little more. The novel of hers that I've read is Veronica. And Veronica is a great novel basically about women's friendship, but also about AIDS and illness, love, and the modeling industry, which is quite corrupt. There is definite drug use and sex in the novel that I think might make the novel spicy enough for some. Mary Gaitskil is not typically considered the most masculine of women or writers on sex or anything like that, really. She's not a very masculine writer at all. But I like her a lot. She knows how to be gritty. She can be in your face when she wants to be. Because I haven't read all of her, all I can really do is this mention of these 3 books. I encourage you to check her out. She's a good writer. I have in my possession, I own more than 3 of those books. I own 3 other novels, I think it is, or it might be 2. But I plan on reading her. I might do a video on Mary Gaitskil in the future. She was one of the original ideas as well. The next writer I'm going to talk about is the Canadian. That's Nelly Arcan. She wrote 3 novels, and I'm trying to think of a polite way to say this for the YouTube algorithm. She died early by her own hand, and her novels display a huge amount of vulnerability. They're first-person narratives. They're kind of written to someone. The novel Full or Crazy is sort of a letter to a specific person. The novel Whore is or Putain, I don't know what it's called in English, is not as good as... Well, I prefer her less to Virginie Despentes. When I read Nelly Arcan, I saw that she had worked in the sex industry, she was a francophone writer, Quebecois. I was going to get something like Virginie Despentes, is what I thought. And she's just totally different. In a way, she's kind of like a modernist. You get these very introspective first-person narratives. There's a lot of vulnerability. The vulnerability is kind of it's kind of the main thing with her. So you get a lot of reflections on love and that vulnerability. I think the work is intending, because she's quite forward about the prostitution in the work. She herself, as I said, was a sex worker. She's very consciously commenting on it. It's autofiction. Like, that is like pitch perfect autofiction. It's exactly what you expect when you want to find some autofiction. So she's solid. She's not my favorite writer, but she's worth reading. All right, so I think that's pretty much everyone that I can readily talk about. The video is a bit long. We're looking at 45 minutes about right now, pre-editing and so forth. What I would say, I suppose, as an effort to wrap this up, is that it seems to me like there's a definite connection between sex and religion and sex and death in literature. And since the prostitute works in sex and is the most direct work in sex, is actually having it, that sense of religion and spiritual something becomes very prominent. I don't think it's an accident that Genet wrote about sex, murder, and transgression all at the same time. And I don't really have a whole lot else to say. I'm not sure who to recommend you of these writers. I like pretty much all of them. There's some I wish I had read more of. But I do also want to point out that the writers who worked in the sex industry, Mary Gaitskil doesn't really write about it so much in what I've read at all. It's in Bad Behavior. There's some mentions of things in Veronica, but it's really not the focus of her work at all. On the other hand, with Virginie Despentes, it's still present. So it's very hard to generalize what the traumatic experiences of that world, how they impact people who are in that. Alright guys, I appreciate you listening to me talk about this weird subject for a while, and several books out. Bye-bye.